Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Tim McGinnis. I'm a director with the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, Inc., SCARS. Joining me today is Debbie Montgomery Johnson, another director of SCARS, herself a 12-year scam survivor, having been through a relationship scam herself. And our guest today is Steve Bustin, who is himself I'm going to call him an impersonation victim, but he is an individual who has been impersonated on dating websites, on social media. His photos, his identity have been substantially abused. And he has been through a multi-year journey of confronting the challenges of having been impersonated and being the face behind such a countless number of criminal frauds, romance scams, dating scams, whatever you want to call them. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Steve, where are you joining us from?
I'm based in Brighton in the UK, so I'm on the south coast of England, almost due south of London.
And as you know, our organization is based in Miami, Florida. I'm in Miami. Debbie Montgomery is in Palm Beach, but we also have offices in Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, Mexico, have a sister office in Guangzhou, China. We have partners and affiliates in over 60 countries around the world, including in the UK. We refer the victims of these crimes to organizations like Victim Support in the UK, Friends Against Scams, as well as providing direct education and support ourselves. So where I would like to begin is to talk a little bit about this experience of having been a sort of a Scammer's Choice Award winner. To the best of our knowledge, you've probably been impersonated something in excess of 5,000 times, if not many, many more. These criminals tend to stay attached to the imagery that works for them. They're not rocket scientists. They don't necessarily know why they work, but empirically, when they find something that works, they stick with it. And your face, like it or not, turns out to be one of those faces that works very effectively to convey trust and authenticity that they rely on as a part of the luring, grooming, manipulation, and control processes. So tell us a little bit about how this began for you, when you first became aware that this was happening. And by the way, I like very much what you said on the BBC about all of the machinations of government, but potentially its ineffectiveness. So we'll go there a little bit later as time permits. So please tell us your story.
So I knew that people had used my photos in the way that a lot of people have had Facebook profiles or Instagram profiles set up with two or three of the photos. Occasionally they'd use my name. Very rarely. It was normally associated with a different name. And then this is what I've never understood amongst the scammers is the first thing they'll do is they'll send out friend requests to all my friends, who of course then report it as impersonating somebody else. They're not, then as you say, the scammers are not always the sharpest knives in the drawer. So I was aware of Facebook activity had happened a few times, and I'd reported it to Facebook, and they had obviously put enough of a filter on it that occasionally I get a pop-up on if I log into Facebook and it says, "We have found this profile. Is this you?" To which the answer is invariably no. Then I had how I discovered this was being used in romance fraud was I had a phone call, and it was ironically Valentine's Day back in 2018, and my mobile rang, and this woman's voice said, "You don't know me, but I thought I knew you." And I was like, okay. And this woman turned out had been chatting to somebody on Zeus, which is a dating site for the over 50s. And she had been chatting to a guy called Martin Peterson. And he had been using my photos, and he'd sent her about 25 photos. She had got suspicious because he'd sent her 2 photos on the same day. First photo was in the morning, claiming it was him having breakfast outside his hotel in Bahrain. The other one was in the evening, and it was him supposedly in his hotel pool. And Constance, the woman who contacted me, noticed that in the morning photo, well, A, there's lots of deciduous trees in the background, which I don't think are native to Bahrain, quite frankly. And B, she noticed that my hair was of silver and curly, because it used to be sort of quite long and curly. In the evening photo, my hair was short and cropped and dark, and I appeared to have suddenly picked up a tan and possibly had a face full of Botox because I had far fewer wrinkles. And that's actually because the photos were 12 years apart. But Constance did she engaged her niece, and they did a reverse Google image search to find where else this photo popped up, and that's when they found my LinkedIn profile, my Facebook profile, my website. Because I work as a professional speaker, event compere, and public speaking coach. So I'm out there on the web quite a lot. And at the time, my Facebook profile was open to everyone because I was sort of using it to promote my services as much as talk about social stuff. So yes, I was fairly easily trackable in that respect. So I had this phone call with Constance. We then had a Skype call that evening because this is in the pre-Zoom days. She met my husband John, because that's the ultimate irony, is I'm married to a man, so these women really aren't my type. But she met John and we chatted, and she realized very quickly that I was not the person she'd been talking to, that this was probably a scammer. But interestingly, she carried on talking to him. She didn't tell him that she'd rumbled him, which was interesting. And she sent me some of the conversations, and they've been talking for about 6 weeks. Some of it was quite intimate. And she carried on talking to him and talking to me at the same time for several days. And then she did challenge him. And she said, I have found your photos on somebody else's profile, without name. I don't think she named me at that point. He came back immediately and said, oh, that guy's a fraud. He's dangerous. I'm going to have him taken down. And as a result of that threat, we showed it to Facebook. Facebook then verified my profile. So I have the little blue tick on Facebook to prove I am who I say I am. But I mean, as we know, the scammers will talk to 10 or 12 women at least at once. They keep notebooks of what they've said to whom. Constance said she would occasionally get a slightly random message from him. Clearly, it was just in the wrong conversation. But she did, after a few days, say to him, I've seen your photos elsewhere. So clearly he wanted to protect his investment in her, in the amount of time he had spent talking to her and building that relationship and the trust. So he said he sent her a copy of his passport, which had my photo in it. Although weirdly, he'd picked a photo where half my face is in shadow. So it was sort of quite an arty photo. There's no way it would have been accepted as a passport photo. Exactly. He'd used my birthday, the 11th of April, but he hadn't used my birth year. He had been telling this woman I was 68, which when I was 46 at the time was a bit galling, I'll be honest, particularly because Constance said, I thought that looked about right. Thanks. So she saw this passport, and clearly Martin thought she wasn't convinced. So he then offered to Skype with her. So they had a Skype call, and to my eternal gratitude, Constance filmed it. She propped up her phone to film the screen of her iPad. And we have the video now. It is extraordinary. He basically had found a video of me talking to my webcam, a bit like this. In fact, I was sat at that end of this room. And he had slowed it down. So it sort of like a really bad connection. And then it's his voice over the top. And we've had it analysed, and it was analysed for a TV programme here in the UK called For Love or Money. And they said, this is just, he's pausing it. That's all he's doing. That's the extent of the technology. But at the time, I showed it to Sussex Police, where I'm based in the UK. And they said they'd never seen anything like that at that point. And I ended up having a conversation with a very well-known crime novelist called Peter James, who was researching a book around romance fraud at the time. And he saw this video, and he said, I would never have dared to make that up in a book because it would have sounded too far-fetched. But can I use it? I went, yeah, of course you can. And actually, I ended up being the inspiration for a character in one of his novels, and he uses the Skype thing. And in fact, that line that Constance said to me, "You don't know me, but I thought I knew you," is actually on the front cover of the book. So I mean, and then Constance and I had also been talking about going public. What Constance wanted to do was, she said, I'll meet him for dinner, and then you walk in halfway through. And it's like, I would quite like to, that would have been quite funny in some ways. I suspect it would have been quite dangerous. And the police were like, no, please don't do that. But of course, he would never have done it. There's no, they never meet. So we agreed to go public. Partly, my background is journalism. I was a reporter for BBC News, or a journalist for BBC News, I should say. And I've written for a lot of newspapers and magazines. And every journalistic bone in my body was going, this is a story. There's a really interesting story here, and this needs to be heard. There's an issue here that needs airing. So in the end, I didn't write it. I was too close to it. It needed a third party to write it. So I gave it to a freelance colleague of mine, and she placed it with the Sunday Times. So one morning in mid-March, suddenly there was a half-page spread on page 3 of the Sunday Times, which is one of the biggest selling Sunday newspapers here in the UK. And the headline was, "Sorry, ladies, I'm not the one you're looking for." And I thought, ain't that the truth? And that's when we went public, and Constance actually sent Martin a copy of this press piece and said, we know you're a fraud. We know this isn't, that you're not real. Please don't use Steve Bustin's posters again. So she did name me. I mean, he must have known my name, or somebody must have known my name, because they've been tracking my Facebook profile for years. That's sort of really what happened. And then we ended up doing a whole load of TV and radio stuff.
What year was that? Well, that was
2018. It was February and March 2018 was when it all hit. And then since then, every now and again, it comes back into the news agenda. And every now and again, I get asked to do interviews about it. I mean, I've just appeared on the BBC because we've got an online security bill going through Parliament here in the UK at the moment.
Exactly.
So I've been commenting on that because quite frankly, it's about 5 years out of date and completely toothless. So it won't make a great deal of difference to things like romance fraud. But every now and again, I get an email or a message from a woman saying, thank you for going public, because I had done a reverse Google image search on some images from a guy I'd been chatting to, and I, through that, found that, saw all the coverage of this being a romance fraud. So I was able to avoid being scammed, and I'm like, job done. And it's one of the reasons I'm still happy to give interviews about it, because if one woman avoids being scammed, then that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I think it also makes it far harder for the scammers to use my pictures. And in that respect, I'm really glad that Constance sent them the press coverage. And I suspect it has tailed off a lot over the last few years, because they're now in the public domain. And every time there's any sort of coverage of romance fraud, it tends to be my pictures that get used in the papers and things. So, in that respect, going public was a public service, but also serving self-interest.
Exactly.
Sorry, it's a very long answer to
No. It's great. Of course, the organizational nature of these criminals is that it's never one single scammer. They work in teams, typically of anywhere from 4 to 6 or 8.
Yeah.
That's how they can be available 24/7. Plus, they're specialized in the particular phase that the crime is going through.
Yeah.
The luring and grooming part is typically one individual who's very good at that. And then another individual will take over at manipulation. And then there will be a harvester, at least, on the money harvesting part of this. Getting the victim to send the money and controlling them through that process.
Yeah. I mean, it's been interesting. I mean, I've now ended up learning an awful lot more about particularly romance fraud, but scams generally, than I ever thought I needed to. And this whole thing about the fact that scammers the first ask will often be for a small amount of money, and they will then pay it back with a little bit of interest or with a little gift on top.
That's very rare, though.
To build trust, certainly not the Sussex police I've been working with. We have by complete fluke, the police force that I'm based within in the UK has one of the strongest teams around this type of fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been working with them and talking to them a lot. And they're saying this is a pattern they're seeing more and more, is that they're using this, they're paying back, they'll borrow £200 and they'll pay back £220 to say, oh, there's a little gift to say thank you, which of course builds trust. One of the reasons Sussex Police is so on it is because they have recognised that we have London Gatwick Airport is within Sussex. And they now have officers trained at Gatwick to look for particularly men, but also women, stood at arrivals with a bunch of flowers for hours, waiting for somebody who's not going to arrive. And that's because, the person they have been talking to online has said, oh, I'm going to be on this flight, I'm going to arrive this day. And then this person is just stood at Gatwick for hours. They now have trained their police officers to keep an eye out, to watch for that and to recognize it. The one thing I'd be interested to know whether your experience says the same. One of the things they did say is that men are harder to convince that they are being scammed than women, and that men will often continue to give.
But men's reaction is quite different than women. Men indeed tend to have greater denial, because for them, think about the impact of what's happening. They've been talking to a woman for months, typically, in some cases quite intimately, only to find out that it was a man on the other end. So there's that aspect of it. And I don't want to characterize what that is, but it is just the glaring reality of that. But it is also that they tend quicker to anger.
Yeah.
Scam victims tend to break down in approximately thirds. One third of these victims, when they find out the truth, go into denial in one form or another. Another third tend to go into anger in its variations, up to and including vigilantism and the desire for vengeance, as well as savior syndrome, etc. And then the final third tend to be realists. They come to grip with the reality of the situation and begin the process of at least accepting that and then trying to figure out, well, how am I going to survive this? How am I going to make it through that? Yes, men are 100 times more difficult to provide support to than women. They tend not to come forward. Only about 2 or 3% of the women will come forward, that is men. So, if 5% of women come through, it'll be well below 1% of men that will come through. And in terms of providing support, it's very challenging. We've reached in our decade of service a little over 9 million scam victims, provided some form of support and education for them. We've had a little over 12,000 individuals go through our own support groups. So we have a quite in-depth grasp of both the psychologies and the brain functions that are associated with these crimes during their various phases, particularly focusing on helping victims understand why this happened, because they're all looking for an answer. Why did this happen? How did it happen? How do I overcome this, etc.? So we focus aggressively and heavily on trying to provide those answers. Debbie.
Well, first I want to say thank you, Steve, for coming on. I know as of someone whose picture has been used, in your case, it's very difficult sometimes to want to do that. And we've spoken with other men that have had their pictures used, and many times they just want to say, enough already, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Or they use it as baiting, say, come on, now you can use my picture, I'm going to find you, which you can't. But I thank you, especially from a man that's in the UK, because the criminal that started with me said he was from London. So I always thought I had this handsome Brit on my hands, and it turned out not to be. But Steve, how does this affect your family? Because a lot of times when I'm working with women, I'll say, you cannot go after the man in the pictures because he is you and he's not the person you're communicating with. But then they go to the family members. They'll call up the spouse or the children or something. Has your spouse ever had someone try to contact them, or has it always been through you?
It's always been through me. And I think partly because I made it very easy, because I put myself out there in the media, and if any, you only have to Google my name and you'll find you can find how to contact me pretty easily. It's not, it's not tricky. Certainly by email and things. I mean, my phone number is probably out and about as well, unfortunately, but just because the nature of the business I'm in. So no, they've never tried to contact John. I think the fact that as soon as you see anything around my face in the dating scam, it mentions the fact I'm gay. Which I think is, Constance, this woman who contacted me, she said that as soon as she spotted that, she was like, oh, well, game over. She's like, it's clearly not him. So I've never, in that respect, I've never had people try and contact me. And in fact, I invited women to contact me if they had dated me, if they dated somebody using my photos. When I was doing this round of media interviews, when we first went public, and I quite legitimately said what I would do is I would organise a party for all these women, and invite some single straight men to see if we could make it work. And it was, I spoke because I know of 18. I've had contact with 18 women now who have dated me in some way. I've only spoken to 2 or 3, but I've had messages from others. And I sent out this invite, and actually most of them came back and said, I'm not sure I'm not sure I would be up for coming to that. I'm not sure about it. And I thought, no, that's fair enough. Actually, to walk into a room full of strangers is very odd.
How does John feel about it, though, or doesn't it bother him?
John, I think, he doesn't like it. I think he found it very odd when it all first happened. He understood why we went public, and his photos ended up being used. we had this awful thing where the Sunday Times piece dropped on that Sunday morning, and within about an hour, the Daily Mail, which is a mid-market, right-leaning, slightly...
I've been interviewed by them.
Yeah. They picked it up incredibly fast, and they were able to lift quotes from the Sunday Times by crediting them, but they couldn't lift the photos because that would have been plagiarism. Instead of contacting me and saying, can we use photos, they went on my social media profiles, particularly my Twitter profile, and lifted a whole load of photos. So they illustrated a piece about the theft of photos from social media sites by going on and stealing lots of photos from social media sites. They clearly didn't see the irony in that, but it did mean that there were photos of John were suddenly being used, which he hadn't given permission for, which I don't think he was terribly happy about.
When we use photos, we only use the photos that have been reported to us or been found on fake profiles. So,
yeah,
we don't go
one
to
person. Sorry, I was going to say, because John obviously doesn't appear in any of the photos that have been used by the scammers. The one person who does is my sister. There is a photo of my sister and I together, which the scammer sent to Constant, certainly, and said that was him with his deceased wife, which I think is a fairly common story. But my sister was not best pleased on that one either. She's very much alive and very well. So yeah, that she was, that was the only person who was sort of bought in during the scam. John was sort of brought in tangentially through some of the media coverage. But no, I mean, we're both pretty sanguine about it. It's part of my life story now, and there's nothing I can do about it.
And it's a very healthy attitude.
Yeah, and I've sort of taken ownership of it. I made the decision to go public. I'll be quite frank, it boosted my business because suddenly I was being introduced on national TV as his public speaking coach, Steve Bustin, and I picked up clients as a result. I also tell the story from the stage. And I talk a bit about, talk the story that what happened in the way I've just described it to you, and I give people advice on looking out for things like some of the gullibility checkers that get used on social media to find potential victims, and how to all the stuff about not using stuff that might be password sensitive in those online games. And I'm aware when I'm on stage, and to an extent, talking to you, talking to the media, I sometimes play it for laughs. And I will, the stuff about my age, the stuff about the fact I'm married to a man, and I will laugh at myself quite happily. I will laugh at the scammers very happily. I will not and will never laugh at the women, because that would be, that is completely beyond the pale. But at the same time, I have to take ownership of it. I just it's part of who I am. It's like people get to say, "Oh, isn't it flattering?" No, not really. I don't think they've gone after my photos because of my devastating good looks. Quite frankly, I think they've gone after me because I've got quite generic looks. Because I went grey quite young, and I think that sort of it gives that sort of older gent but still hopefully moderately fanciable sort of look, and also because
trustworthy is the word.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take that. But I think it's also because my Facebook profile used to be open to everyone. They could construct an entire life out of it, because there was photos of me on stage, there was photos of me in fancy dress, there was photos of me selling jam on a stall, there was photos of me in my garden, there was photos of me with the dog on holiday. So they were able to construct an entire persona out of it. So interestingly, a lot of my colleagues in the professional speaking world have also had their photos used. I mean, I can name 4 or 5 very well-known speakers, including the 7 States, who have also had them. And we have had conversations. I mean, I'm sure you know Jeffrey Hazlitt, who used to be on the Apprentice in the US. He and I've been on his podcast, and he and I have chatted about it, and other people as well. So I think it is partly just because of the nature of what we do. We tend to live our lives relatively publicly because we want people to find us. Having said that, my Facebook profile is now, needless to say, friends only. But even then, people don't realize, your featured photo and your profile shot are still visible to people who visit your profile. And, it really is as easy as right click, save to desktop. It's so easy for people to capture those photos.
Exactly.
Well, we appreciate
Last question, Debbie.
What's that, Tim?
Do you have a last question?
No, I could talk to him forever, and I know he's got to.
We've got a few minutes if you want to keep going, but that's all right.
I was going to tease us like we ought to go and do a dog and pony show together, because I do the same thing as you do too. But I will never ever. I mean, the victim blame that I've taken from the media is it could be devastating if you're not in the right place to hear it.
Yeah. But of the 18 women I've had contact with, one is a professor at Cambridge. And a lot of people say, "Oh, you must be so stupid to fall to someone like this. I'm like, no, absolutely not.
No.
They're very good at finding people who are vulnerable, who are just at a point in life where they may just be trying to be open and to possibilities and things. And I said, it's nothing to do with stupidity. And there are, I know, say this woman, she's a professor at Cambridge, and she said to me, she said, I'm an intelligent woman, and they just caught me at a point where it just felt right, and I went with it. So
it happens, and unfortunately, it happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
But thank you for being so open and honest about it too. And you do have a very kind face, and I can see why they've used you in the past. But I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Steve, I know you're on a time crunch, so I want to thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity to record this and being able to share it with our audiences. I will make a copy of the video available for you if you'd like to use it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So greatly appreciate you joining us today and speaking out on this. And if you're aware of others who have been impersonated like yourself and you'd like to put them in touch with us, we'd greatly appreciate that. Also, in your travels and in your speaking, if people come forward and they are in need of professional support, please feel free to recommend us or to recommend some of the other organizations such as Victim Support in the UK. They're a legitimate organization. The Cybercrime Support Network is another legitimate one in the United States. Those are really the only three, including SCARS, that provide real professional victim support. We recommend every victim that they see a trauma counselor or therapist as a part of their recovery process. So appreciate it very, very much. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.